Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Gay. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of BlockCerts Blockchain. And we have another jam-packed agenda this morning and a webinar that you can't miss. And we're grateful that you joined us here. I always look forward to Fridays, and maybe it's because we've been in lockdown and it's just another opportunity to talk to people around the world. And this week is no different. We continue to grow in size and scale with this webinar. And today we've stacked the deck again to bring a global view on the world from here and how reopening will change our work and our lives really for future generations. And COVID has created realities for all of us, and our hearts go out to those that have been affected, and there isn't anybody that I don't know that hasn't been affected in one way or another. And one of the realities is that it's condensed time, it's creating new needs, and it really is exposing the cracks that were already there. And that's a theme of each of our weeks, and certainly this week we have some amazing individuals on the call that are going to share their views. So let's meet today's panelists. Tim Vasco, who's the Chief Executive Officer and founder of BlockCerts Blockchain. Good morning, Tim.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're super excited about our panelists today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. And then we'll talk here. Tim is going to be the presenter and take us here in a minute. And we're first going to be talking with Joel Pascal, who's coming to us from Mauritius. And Joel is the director of BlockCerts Africa, which melds in nicely with our topic discussion today. So good. I was going to say good morning, but it's actually your good night. So good evening, Joel.
Yeah, I'm always coming in. I'm the night owl. So
that's right.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. I'm very honored to be invited and to be a panelist today, and I look forward to get going.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks, Joel. And then also we have Keith Bowie, who's a research scholar and is leading an effort that I'm just enamored over because it has such a global impact. And I won't share any more than that because we'll do that here in just a minute. But Keith is from Columbia University and is leading the effort for just an amazing transformation on a global scale. So Keith, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And then also we have our weekly panelists, which Daniele Minci, who's coming to us from Rome, Italy, and the president of Fusion STX. Daniele, good evening.
Thanks for having me. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here again. And then I don't know if I see.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Okay.
Oh, the good doctor is here. There
yeah. Well, thanks for gracing us with your presence today.
Wow, you guys are with that kind of an introduction already.
Yes. Dr. Zaid is the president of eHealth Global, and we look forward to your perspective as well. Thanks for joining us again, Dr.
Thank you.
Zaid. So with that, Tim, let's get started. Tim Vasco, the founder, chief architect of BlockCerts Blockchain and CEO, that's really leading the charge globally with secure virtual spaces and leading us on today's topic and discussion. Tim?
Thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody again for being here. The entire audience and our panelists, of course, we know everybody's time's valuable, so we really try and bring real thought leadership and insights from around the globe. And I think today you're going to find that. And really, this says it all. What will we learn from, and what will we leave to inherit for future generations from here? That's really what we're going to talk about today, is all the things that we've learned. We've had this incredible experience to learn and to be students within a environment none of us really expected. This thought actually came to me from Joel on another call we were having as he was making a comment. And I'm really excited to have you here, Joel. As always, it's great being with you virtually. It was a lot of fun, and when we got together in Southeast Asia, and what really struck me was he was talking about children and what they're doing with this idea of homeschooling and what we're teaching and learning. And it got me to thinking about how all of us as adults are actually able to re-enter the classroom of life and think about how can we do things differently? How can we do things better? How can we grow no matter what age we are? But some poignant things that we need to look at that are very real. Classrooms are closed in 191 nations. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced 1.5 billion students and 63 million primary school teachers and secondary school teachers out of classrooms. That's just astounding to me. And the massive uptake of not letting that stop our education, I think should be a message to us all. Keith, having you here as a scholar from Columbia University, you're at an academic institution, I think it's really incredible that institutions, academics, and everybody have stepped up, maybe more than anybody, and really immediately said, no, we're not going to let this slow us down. We're going to keep learning. We're going to keep educating. And it's a strong message we can all have from all over the world. So, you know, we all know that kids are way more creative, way more adaptable than all of us. Well, maybe there's something to be learned from that. The numbers really are unprecedented. 91% of students worldwide are displaced right now. And since the COVID pandemic began, caregivers, educators have responded in stride. They've really been instrumental in finding new ways to keep children learning. A few webinars ago, we talked about sports. What's going to happen with physical activity? I know I've started working out with my daughter, doing our workouts in the garage. We've got a heavy bag in there. We hit the heavy bag and get some great exercise in. But with that, I'd like to introduce Joel, because he really was the one who spawned this idea of what we've started to open up with education, learning, and really what that's about is new ways and new levels of thinking. So Joel, maybe you can jump in and talk to us about your perspectives, about what's happening in Africa. There's billions of people all over the world affected by this, and I think it was really insightful. So thank you for joining us, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say and what your thoughts are.
Tim, thank you very much for a great introduction, and I'm really honored to be here today as a panelist. If I can start with a sentence. So COVID-19 has actually created the perfect disruption for decision makers to feel pressured. So the problem with democratic governments is that every decision impacts their bottom line of voters every 5 years, right? So making decisions is always a very tricky thing to do in a democratic government. And we have been trying in Mauritius, and I'm going to start with my own country, my own backyard. We've been talking since I am a child, 15 years, to change the education system. And every single time it's such a polarizing theme, because the opposition party doesn't like, what is going to be changed, and then they come into power, and then the people who were in power challenge the opposition who is now running the country. So it's just a status quo that is just infuriating and extremely frustrating. So what has happened is this technology, the internet, literally nobody has really, apart from the people who are really in the know-how, nobody has ever looked at the internet as this driving force for business and economics on this side of the world. When you read the papers, it's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the whole population that is really looking at the infrastructure of the government and saying, the infrastructure of the internet and saying, oh my goodness, there is billions of dollars to be made here. Exactly like we have a road infrastructure, you can choose to build an Uber, like an Uber type company and make millions of dollars moving people around. And you can use the same infrastructure to leave your house and go buy 1 pound of tomatoes every single day and come back to your house. Same infrastructure, very different outcomes. So what happened with the COVID-19 is everybody had to stay home. We've been home for 60 days. And the first 2 weeks, parents said, we're gonna have a vacation with our kids. So for 15 days, there was no education. Nobody was learning anything. Parents was just, like making their kids watch videos. Like, for example, I have a 4-year-old baby girl. So we were enjoying each other's time, right? But then after 15 days, the government comes in, says, guys, situation is critical, and we're gonna extend for another month. So now suddenly you're paying for education, but your kid is not getting that education because the kid cannot go to school. So scramble by all their different private school institutions as well as the government. And within 72 hours, there was an online school program in place in my country. 72 hours, guys. So when you want to do something, you can do it, but everybody has to be on the same page. And so basically, we have reached infrastructure maturity in Africa, not necessarily over the whole continent, but we were able to weather the storm. And right now, there are young adults who are studying their uni classes exactly as if they were in university in Mauritius. This is happening also in Madagascar. It is also happening on a remote island called Rodrigues, which belongs to our country, because we recently put a 2 gigabyte connection between the main island and Rodrigues, which is 650 kilometers away. And the same thing is happening in Seychelles, which is a small island of 88,000 people north of Mauritius, 2 hours flight away. So the idea of the problem with what has happened before COVID-19 is that we fell in love with a way of doing things. Humans are very ritualistic, and humans love to do things that they already know how they're gonna feel about it. And COVID basically threw all that out of the window, and we have now a generation of children that is being introduced to the internet, not as an entertainment tool, not as a tool for video games or for watching Peppa Pig and other funny videos online, but they are being introduced to the internet as a means of doing work. And we are most probably looking at the first digital generation post-COVID. That means that our children will play games, will watch videos as well, but since a very young age, they will be using the internet infrastructure to study, to do work, to be productive. And at the end of the day, this is exactly what this incredible tool is for. When we started tracking the numbers of users in 1991, there were only 15 million users in the world, 15 million. 30 years later, okay, in 2020, the last tracking was done in January. There is 4,574,000,000 people in the world connected to the internet. What's funny about that, if we go and look at the internet usage, you will see that not a lot of the traffic is being used for work, for academia, almost 90% of all this traffic is just entertainment, games, video games. A lot of the stuff happening on the infrastructure right now is just for entertainment and for so many other things. So post-COVID, I was looking at a report from Forbes. You are seeing spikes for video conferencing, spikes for collaboration tools, Microsoft Teams, Slack, and so on and so forth. So you can see clearly that we are moving to a new dynamic in our society where we understand that we have created this incredible tool, but we now need to use it for its real purpose, which is connecting us to all the knowledge in the world.
So Joel, do you think that, how do you think that that's going to impact the difference in learning of how kids see the internet, how they see the decisions that leaders are going to make across Africa, things like that? I heard an interesting stat, and earlier you saw a picture of Joel and I and Greg Kullar, one of our partners in Singapore. And Greg was actually locked down in India, which was really interesting. So, and as he was locked down here, I think my video went off. So as he was locked down, Greg was telling me that Modi in India released an app. And this, you talk about how many kids went to school. In India, Prime Minister Modi released an app, and in 3 days, I think it was, I'm going to get the number wrong.
200 million.
Something like,
200 million.
Yeah, 200 million downloads and app users in India. 200 million, greater than the.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that would be greater than the population of Brazil and about 90 or 80% of the population of the United States. It's just incredible the amount of immediate response when a society gets behind something. So I guess my question is, from your observations, when we look at this idea of 1.5 billion students, all impacted, all going through these same things that you just described, and leaders looking at this, what's your takeaway? What does that mean for future generations? What does that mean? And I don't mean even big future generations. We're talking about millennial, kids of millennials now, and we're talking about 20-year-olds. We're talking about everybody that got hit by this. What's your opinion? What do you think?
So my opinion on this, and it's very, very good question. So we have the pre-COVID perspective, which is the internet is a playground that never closes.
Right.
It's the ultimate playground, never closes. And then we have the post-COVID generation, where basically we are creating the first set of digital citizens in the world. We are going to witness the first set of people who are going to use this infrastructure to its full extent since they are babies. And they will come with a way of analyzing data, seeing life. We are going to literally, I was looking at an article about neural connections, where we will be connected possibly to the internet and
the neural networks,
to information, neural networks, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, it's amazing that we have this data which is out there, but we have to go through our phone to get access to it. And it doesn't seem too crazy to think that we can have a chip in our brain that is constantly connected to all this data. And when you ask me a question, it's just, you know, like I Google search it in my brain and I just give it to you.
Right.
You know, it's just, so this generation, and what's funny about it, when I used to see an iPad in my daughter's hands, I used to see it as something dangerous.
Right.
Post-COVID, I'm looking at an iPad in my daughter's hands and I see it as a tool for disruption. Right. It's crazy. 60 days, right? Brilliant. 60 days.
60 days. That's dangerous. The amazing thing. Yeah.
Right?
That, like, the timelines are so incredibly compressed. And I go back to what we saw at the digital fintech summit in Singapore, and how we thought things were moving fast then. We had no idea. And that was just in November, right?
Yeah.
And we were really excited about how dynamic things were back then. Now it's really truly unprecedented. And I guess that gets us to the next point, which is this idea of digital transformation, and what we've got the great honor to have Keith Bowie here to tell us about in setting these kinds of standards and the things that we really are looking forward to hearing about. So Keith, really excited to have you here today, and would love to hear your idea and your thoughts on this COVID, post-COVID world, and not only that, but what we were working on. We were talking about being there in February in New York City, and who knew, right? Who knew? And all of a sudden, here we are today. So welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Lovely to be here. Hi, everyone. So, a couple of things personally got going on with regards to, cyber and digital. And the first one is some research we're doing at Columbia University, where we're creating a cyber risk management framework for digital financial services in developing world. And that's been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we're getting to a point where our aim is to publish sometime towards the end of September, early October. And timelines are a bit of a flux at the minute because, collaboration is now virtual rather than standing together on a whiteboard. And we've got to take into account, as Joe was saying, one of our key collaborators is homeschooling his kids. So during the day is really, difficult to get his time. But we're hoping to get that out, and I'll make a sales play here. If anyone would like to help review it, then please contact us either via Tim or Dan, and we're happy to get you on a review list. The second thing is I'm part of a boutique consultancy called Fintova, and we specialize in digital transformations, mainly within financial services. What we're noticing is that within the financial services industry, there's a couple of different kinds of transformation historically. There are those who have to transform just to keep the status quo. So they do little bits and pieces, and if they're smart about it, they'll do little bits and pieces with the view to a bigger target in mind. But are those who really use it as a transformation to transform the whole business. And one of the things we really should enforce here or reinforce here is, digital transformation sounds like the IT team want to do some cool stuff, and they go and do a whole bunch of cool techie stuff, and you've got new technology and everything's cool. However, a proper digital transformation is driven by business needs. So you should have business requirements, a business vision led by the CEO preferably, or the CEO or someone in the C-suite that involves technology as a part. So there are, there should be business transformations in there, there should be reorganizations in there, and the technology should enable that. And, I've been lucky to be a part of a couple now, which had very, very strong business leadership. One which was an organizational change and replacing legacy technology to support the organizational change. And the second was a transformation we had to do for the bank I was working for in New York in response to some regulatory needs, which meant a whole change with 22 different work streams. I was creating a technology team at the same time as trying to support 21 other business work streams. So, but the important thing was there was buy-in from the top, there was driving from the top, and it was funded very well. And I think some of the key parts around digital transformations in general are, try and move away from legacy onto, things like cloud. So cloud's a very important part of any digital, and really most organizations are now doing cloud first, and then, anything else has to be justified for whatever needs. And people are not building physical data centers now, unless that's a core part of your business. Everyone's looking to move to a cloud provider and either buy, platform infrastructure or software as a service. Second thing is really, data, right? So data, apart from people, data, I think, is your most important part of the organization. And lots of big financial organizations and organizations in general have tons and tons of data that's completely untapped for use. Now, over the last maybe decade or so, people, organizations have understood the power of the data. And with the advent of analytical tools and, large data lake repositories and different technologies coming into play now, that data is now starting to be used in a more constructive way to shape your business. But I personally believe we've still barely scratched the surface of what organizational data can do there. So having strong data governance, strong data principles.
Keith, on that point on data, don't you think that in like the COVID world and the world we're in now, that's going to become even more relevant and more important?
100%, 100%. And, what we're seeing, both through the consultancy and through university, is that data is now being used in new ways to, for example, look at potential treatments and vaccines, so that the medical part of the university is doing all sorts of wonderful stuff towards a vaccine using, probably unprecedented cooperation with, similar organizations in medical throughout the world. That's for sure. The COVID-19 has kind of accelerated one of the maybe surprising impacts is that organizations who had a digital transformation strategy are now accelerating that strategy in response to COVID, because their operations have moved from a, in-person or hybrid in-person digital to almost fully digital now, or fully virtual organization. So we have people kind of pausing what they were doing, reevaluating their strategy through the trends that they've noticed from customers and clients, all using the data analysis techniques that we kind of mentioned briefly before. So
and I think we've heard some of that from Zaid as well, from regarding like the health industry. You bring up the health industry and how that has really, we've got these ideas of health and the research that can be done, the treatments that can be done, and all of this is live interactions. So we've got live interactions on education, we've got live interactions, and even this kind of thing on business. And then of course we've got healthcare. Do you have any thoughts on that, Zaid?
So there's something that's really interesting. Yes, quick answer. I have an idea. I have a thought about this. So there's a couple of interesting things here. One, we were earlier talking about the generational gap. And so one thing I do notice in my practice and other practices is that younger individuals are very quick to adapt a digital world relative to older individuals, obviously, because they've grown up in that. So when you're talking about, your daughter accessing the iPad and using it as a tool, it's not even a tool. It's like us picking up a pen and thinking about writing something. It's just a natural part of their life now, and it's no longer anything different. It's like putting on a shirt in the morning. Having said that, the unique thing that I'm seeing about where we're moving with this is the bi-directional information that takes place. So I guess, and you guys could probably speak to this much better than I can, but as I understand it, we viewed the internet initially as sort of a level 1 piece of information when it first came out, Internet 1.0, where we would get PDFs or information that educated us. And then as we got into a more sophisticated internet, we got into social media, et cetera, things like that, where we could then interact with the internet as well. So what's interesting is in healthcare, we're seeing the same sort of trend, where not only can we gather information from our patients, but we can feed back to our patients. And there's a two-way communication that's continually taking place in the research realm. So for example, in the cannabis area, not only can I obtain information from my patients about what their medical ailment is, I can then make a recommendation about what kind of cannabis they should be taking, and where to buy it and how to buy it and how to administer it. But more importantly, they can then feed back to me through their web portal how they're responding to that cannabis-based medicine, so that I actually can then tweak it and make changes and say, okay, this is the drug dosage changes you need to make to get a better response, or you need to shift to a different type of chemovar to get a better response. So what it's creating is this bidirectional information travel that is allowing us to elevate what we're doing in the healthcare area. And then obviously the natural extension to that will be machine learning processes, which will happen in an automated fashion so that I won't have to make the changes. In fact, a more sophisticated system such as machine learning will be able to help us make that decision in that process.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and back to you, Keith, where Dr. Muhammad Ali stated that he's got these experiences already. This is on the ground experiences. All this is being passed across data, and this is all this idea of cloud consideration. So when you boil that back down to an organization going digital, then managing that data, then managing security, and fundamentally, isn't that kind of the research and the real work that is ahead of us, and that you're in fact working on with Columbia and the Gates Foundation and so on?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think there's a couple of really good points made there, in that the frequency of which people are interpreting data, so real time certainly in the almost to the real time in the medical industry. People in financial services maybe looked at reports monthly or weekly or something. They're now coming down to daily or weekly, depending on your firm, to actually look at the trends of their customers and what they're doing, right? So, things like, credit or debit card renewals and things where we're moving virtual, but they've now literally in the space of, Joe said 60 days, gone completely virtual, right? So,
Yeah,
so that's
right.
really important, right? And with regards to data, so managing your data, complying with data privacy acts like GDPR, CCPA, and stuff like that, that's a really important thing. And the cloud providers, I would say, in the last kind of 5-ish years, have really upped their game on ensuring that data segregation is good, the security tools available to organizations are better, and we've almost got to a point now where, also these cloud providers are pumping so much more money into security than an individual organization could or would.
Right.
They're potentially getting so complicated now that actually the organizations themselves understanding how to effectively implement security is now becoming a challenge, because you're not just having all these wonderful tools if you can't implement them properly or don't know how to implement them properly. And there was a breach a few years ago and that was exactly the case. The cloud provider saying, hey, we give you all these wonderful tools. And the organization said, well, actually, we don't know how to use them. So there's a lot of education going on between the cloud providers and organizations now, and how best to put in security policies to protect your data.
Well, and privacy too, because you've got data privacy here too, right?
Privacy,
and so these laws and formats of what we've got for cloud considerations and all this structure that has to go in. And what's astounding is how rapidly now that's accelerating. And I wanted to point out another thing that I hear often Zaid talk about, which is cannabis-based medicine, because I know from personal experience, I worked on this with Zaid. I had a family member who was on an opioid for pain after some surgery, and I called him up and I said, hey, can you help? It was my daughter actually, and can you help my daughter? She doesn't want to be on this stuff, but she's in incredible pain. It was pretty serious surgery. And Zaid helped me understand a lot about CBD oil, about this pain medication. I went through the whole experience, which was pretty interesting and not what I would say controlled, but brought it back. And literally within a day, my daughter was no longer on an addictive medication. She was not in pain. And, I was sold on the whole model. But when we look at that, and this is really getting back to that digital, both privacy, security, and data analytics, how would we know that both subjective and objective, or in medical terms, they call it the SOAP note, how would we know that if that was locked in Zaid's files and maybe my personal files on paper or on PDFs? You're never going to know how to transform industries. And I can't think of any bigger industry we need to transform right now. Well, the two biggest ones we just brought up, healthcare and finance. And it all kind of comes together because what we transform today is what our children are going to learn as they're learning now in education. So I think it's interesting to see all these points of massive transformation happening all at once, and looking at that infrastructure of how you do that. And that's where the experts like you are coming in, Keith, is that whole idea of what this means to organizations and how they have to think this through and literally set new standards, right?
Yeah, completely. And as I say, I put my mortgage on, no organization expected to have 90+% of their staff working remotely for this length of time, right? A BCP plan's normally is for a weather event or something like that, where your staff might be out for a couple of days or a week or something. No way it was like this. And that then becomes, your leaders have to be really focused on their message, their support. As I mentioned before, people do have to do, things like homeschooling during the day, so give them the leeway to do it. Right? And I think the real really successful leaders will show empathy and guidance to their staff.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this whole idea, last webinar we had a leader from Refinitiv World Check on, and he was talking about the failures in the VPNs and the banking systems to even handle that much staff working from home.
Yeah, completely. And so there's people are learning, as I say, we mentioned before, they're learning almost on the fly here, right? What's my capacity for my VPN access, for example? So they're putting more infrastructure in, and and the bank I used to work for, I'm still very close to this kind of support teams there. They were physically shipping the trader desktops, turrets, and everything to their houses. So they could work, not trying to trade off a laptop, but they had their full setup there, which also needed the regulators to listen things a little bit, because not having all the, the recording and surveillance that you have physically on the trade floor and having that distributed was a bit of an issue. So the regulators had to play ball as well.
Exactly. And so
one interesting thing, Tim,
I
was just going to mention one interesting thing I was going to say is that, you mentioned that, with the data being locked up and how do you get access to it? I think another point that we should not, miss out on is the fact that because when we do go digital, we're able to actually tap in on a worldwide platform. So to me, in healthcare, and I suspect in finance, it's no different, having that information about how people across the world are reacting and how they're responding to different treatments is much more powerful than just my local area or the Canadian market or the North American market, for that matter of fact, because I think that's when we start to really get an understanding about how we can manage disease processes and what impacts we have.
Yeah, exactly. I think that kind of speaks to the idea of a, as Keith has here, a new cadence, right? A new pace. We've talked about 60 days. We've talked about how we are all learning, and learning is forever and for everybody. And we're just forced to do it right now in not only new ways that the children are being educated, but what we're learning, trial by fire, if you will, on how to create these systems. What do you think about that, Keith?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, and going back to what Joe mentioned earlier on about, the kids today are going to come up in a completely digital world. Kids coming out of college now are used to much better tools than I had back in the day, and I won't say how far back in the day. But they've come up in a kind of DevOps kind of world, and they're used to working very iteratively, very agile. So implementing and enhancing your agile processes and your delivery processes to make sure that you know, you work in conjunction between technology and the business is absolutely key. And I know the, you know, agile evangelists must say, oh, you have to co-locate and you have to do this and you have to do that. Well, I don't agree with that. I think you have to ensure that your practices like your sprint planning, your sprint reviews, etc., are carried out. But doing it remotely or, you know, distributed is just fine to me. And I've been part of multiple initiatives that had that in mind, where we had kind of, you know, development teams in India, and we're still working on agile. So, you know, they were doing what Joe was, right? 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night. They were on a call with us in the morning, and we'd flip around to make sure no one was you know, had the bad end of the stick all the time. So that's really key. But, you know, so doing that and making sure that your velocity is continuing or increasing is key. But you also want to make sure that, you know, don't sacrifice, you know, integrity and diligence for the sake of speed, right? So you have to make sure your checks and balances are in play, and that coming into play at a more regular cadence now is also very key to making sure that you don't go completely off the rails is what you're doing.
Well, and that kind of comes to your baseline point there, which is how we're reinventing the business model at its core, right?
Yeah, completely. You know, so as well as the infrastructure thing. Yeah.
If I can ask a question, Tim, if you allow me.
Yeah, please jump in. Of course.
I really need to ask you this, since you're an expert in digital transformation. So my family business is involved in cybersecurity and very complex data management. So companies with multiple data centers and multiple locations, you know, and we dealt with them in the digital transformation process. And every time I came out of the meetings, I felt extremely frustrated. And the reason why is I was coming to this meeting for work to get done, but I felt that the people within that organization were actually doing a PR job. So they were not doing any kind of digital transformation. What they were doing is telling people that this is what we are trying to do, because it was the public relations language and message that had to go out to let everybody know that, oh, we are about innovation, we are about change. So the real digital transformation just happened 60 days ago. And I'm being very honest. We have seen so many e-commerce websites come up from large corporations here in the country. They could have done that 5 years ago. The infrastructure is mature enough, but they are just in love with this old model of doing business. And go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously, Joe, you know, cultural transformation is the most difficult thing an organization will do, full stop, right? So I've taken a couple of my teams, you know, once many years ago, where we actually introduced agile delivery at the expense of waterfall, because the organization was very used to, you know, very traditional. BAs talk to the business, BAs come back and talk to the developer. 6 months later, I've got something to show you, right? And when we moved to an agile delivery process, it was very important that not only were the technology guys on board, but the business guys were on board as well, and they owned the product that we were delivering. So enforcing that to them is key. If they don't take ownership of that, you know, and that they don't sort of say, hey, I'm the product owner, this is my baby, it then gets really, really difficult, and you experience some of the situations that you've just been mentioning.
And you know, Keith, I'm going to jump in here quickly, because you used 2 words, and I'm going to just, for the audience, explain that. In our digital world, those of us that have been around for quite some time, waterfall means planning everything out, which is what big organizations do, and then step by step deploying it, whether that be in a technology build or a business build. It's like having all of your roadmaps set up and then executing on the steps. Agile was brought in really and perfected, I think, in Silicon Valley, where we're like, you know what, we're going to build really quickly something, and then we're going to modify it on the fly. And these concepts that we now hear about all the time, lean startup and all those kinds of things, came out of this concept that when we build something quickly and learn what we don't know, we're way more effective than trying to predict the future. And in academics, we learned, and technology, actually, we learned this the hard way with big installations like SAP, who followed the waterfall principles and failed 70–80% of the time to actually make the transformation they expected. So there was this remodeling, again, getting back to that, reinventing the business model at its core. And I think there's a lot of impacts here that you guys have both brought up, Joel and Keith, where we've got the PR part of it that drives that. We've got the culture, the organizational culture that drives that. But in 60 days, we haven't had any of those options. It's just like respond. We talk a lot about first responders that are visible, but there's a lot of responders out there that are invisible, that are working behind the scenes, really trying to keep their businesses and the things that we're doing in our world working. And so thank you for that really great insight on digital transformation, Keith, and great question, Joel. And I think it kind of leads directly into what we want to point out, which what happens when companies aren't ready for this kind of transformation. What happened from companies that weren't quite as nimble, and what are we starting to see on the downside of things happening in the world that may not have happened had they embraced this digital transformation a little more quickly and a lot more thoughtfully. And to use your word again, Keith, agile thinking. And we see this, that bankruptcies are happening, large, well-established organizations are going down. Retail, of course, has been decimated, as has the hospitality industry and so forth. But what we saw largely in these smaller organizations are these dynamic new ways to deliver things like food, retail, services. And this one struck me, the COVID-19 surcharge. I just saw that and I'm like, look at this. Like now we have a new line item in our financial structure. How do we put those surcharges in? Keith, this is really interesting. We're working on this, and thank you for sharing with me the Digital Financial Observatory project. But do you think that we'll start seeing surcharges like this for security and for, interesting issues that companies are going to face? Are we just going to expose that in our product lines now and our margins and say, here you go, we got a new line item on the financial statement?
I would sincerely hope not. That just looks like someone trying to price gouge to me, right? I think there's enough of a trend for the cost of moving to cloud, or the security service involved in that, whatever, over the last 5-6 years, that if someone tried to do that, I don't think it'd be around for very much longer because people just won't deal with them, right? Right. I've seen a lot of people really bristling, especially when things like hand sanitizer or Clorox wipes were tripled or quadrupled in price just because of the demand. And I think those retailers are going to suffer longer term because people just not interested, especially with something as serious as that.
But do you think that now we're going to see more of this kind of we get back to the concept of data, and because this is going to be more transparent and more obvious in things like retail, especially things that affect that end user, more of a personalized service with even more transparency. Like, hey, you just can't BS people anymore. You're part of a community, and we've got a flow, and we can actually look it up. That's a lot of what we focus on with the blockchain.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good statement, and I'm personally very interested to see as we start to open up. And I live in Southern Connecticut, so we opened up on the 20th. The fact that, you know, if you look at the stats, the retail, obviously people shopping retail over the last 2 months has gone, you know, exponentially higher. I'm very interested to see, you know, after the initial surge of people just want to get out of the house to go to, you know, bricks and mortars retail establishments, if that's really going to last for a long period of time. I
Right.
think that'll be a really interesting data point, maybe 6 to 12 months time.
Right. Well, we've already heard that the transformation is in healthcare. We know that the transformation is in the education space. And now, of course, we're going to see what this massive transformation has done as we reopen for business and globally in each area, in each section. In our area here, we had this conversation. You're in a little burg in Connecticut, and I'm on an island, and Joel's on island, and you know, we're very contained here. Our cases are, we have no cases on the island at all right now, and it's just locked down. I like to joke about it. Zaid's actually on the island as well, up island. But I like to joke about island mentality. It kind of worked this time. And, but moving slow and not really opening up much. When I first moved here, somebody told me, it'll take you a decade, Tim, before people actually figure out you're not a transient. So, so we're opening up for business. But I think it brings that whole point back to what we know now is no one's immune to the basics of humanity, and all this world is depending on these networks and the trust for our lives and livelihoods. How we do these things, what we do, what we take forward in the education is really, really critical. So one last thing I'd like to ask Keith out of all of this is, can you just give us a really high, quick level reason, pre-COVID, why you started the project at Columbia? Why did the Gates Foundation step in and fund that? And, you know, what was that about? I mean, obviously you knew something, and this thinking was out there, and it was research all of a sudden come to reality.
Yeah, so, you know, the Gates Foundation, obviously, they're looking to, you know, improve services in the developing world and access to financial products for the underbanked, I think as they're called. And that may be via gender or race or whatever, for whatever reason. The infrastructure itself, in some cases, is very basic, and there's a wide range of capabilities within the actors within the actual ecosystem itself. So what we're looking to do was, let's give across the whole ecosystem some guidelines on preventative cyber measures, which is what that's the beta we issued 2 weeks ago, right? Which covers, but not just, you know, hey, even though it's based on international standards, and for people who are familiar with cybersecurity, most of the beta we released will be very familiar. However, what we wanted to do was actually say, and this is how you should do it. So there'll be a set of processes to say, you know, you must have an asset inventory. This is how you should make that asset inventory, and so on and so forth. And we're going to do the same with a threat matrix. This is how you respond to a threat, depending on the capabilities of your organization. So a very cyber immature organization may literally responding to some cyber attack. It may just be, I got to pick up the phone and talk to my facilities provider. Whereas someone who's way more mature, like a bank, actually is able to deal with it themselves. So we're going to be putting together a threat matrix and a threat processes to reply to that. And also, you know, making sure that in order to understand where you sit in the matrix, we're going to do some risk assessments, self-assessments for organizations to fill out. So the whole idea was to build on stuff that was already there internationally and put some, you know, Columbia's IP on it with regards to, and this is how you should protect and react yourselves.
Right. And so when we get into that, we really are doing this, building that next generation of businesses, careers. And what's struck me is how these stats in the last 60 days have been that we've lost more jobs in the last 60 days than we've created in the last dozen years.
Yeah.
Now, what
Wow.
are we going to do to rapidly empower those millions to rebuild these businesses and work globally with all this safety and connectivity and knowledge? So it's going to hit every industry, really. And that level of certainty that we see certain industries that are booming, like Amazon, shipping, the infrastructure, even this tool we're using right here, Zoom, that have just exploded. Or as Joel said earlier, the stats on digital transformation that's gone up. But now we really need to take these standards and create this kind of enablement, expanding digital connectivity, and then deliver innovative transformation tools, which is a lot of the foundation work that you guys were already working on beforehand. And like you said, the tools are there. Both of you guys said that independently. You're like, the tools were there. Zaid said this in the past. The tools were there. They were just sitting on the shelf. And all of a sudden somebody said, wow, we maybe ought to go pull that off the shelf and use it now, because we don't really have another tool. We don't really have another choice. So I think this has been a really fascinating discussion, and I want to thank you guys for all of the insight. It's just amazing to me that, having met Keith in February, and now all of a sudden here we are, a continent apart, on the same continent, but a continent apart, and we're able to do this and keep our work going. Joel, we've been working together for a few years and traveled together, and we're still in touch and all that. It's just really cool to see that. And we also see that our kids are experiencing this, and maybe we start seeing the global classroom. And we talked about that, millions of kids possibly participating in sports and education around the world. And I'd like to kind of summarize what we have with this, that children are the most vulnerable citizens, and they're the greatest of our treasures for our social networks and for our society. What we set up today will establish our foundations of what we're doing tomorrow and the future. And it's leadership like this, the thought leadership that we're able to have the benefit of bringing into the system, bringing into these discussions, and really learn from, that will allow us to gain these amazing insights that all of you you've brought, our previous speakers and panelists, and what you guys have shared today. So thank you for doing that. It's the most important thing I think we can do, is keep learning. We've all been given the opportunity to learn, and it's regardless of our age or our education or our country or our status, it's given us insights we never expected. This is how we'll respond. This is what we're going to give to our future generations of kids. We'd love, as Keith said, that this research project is not insular. It's about getting it out there, getting input on it, really having people have a look at it and say, what do you think is important, both from the business community as well as the community of end users that are going to end up having to touch this, whether they know it or not. Our lives are going to be affected, just like they have been here. So with that, I'd like to open the floor up to any further questions. Dan, any of the panelists, anything that came in while we were talking, and to say thank you very much for all of those incredible insights.
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks, panelists, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Yeah, the one line item got some responses, and most people said that that's BS, and that that won't fly. And obviously prices will be baked into prices, and for those retailers that try and gouge, as said, they're not long for this world,
right?
Really. So I did have some takeaways from what everyone said, and the panelists. So Joel, COVID forced decisions from decision makers to actually make decisions and move forward, and within 72 hours, you had an online program in place for education, which is amazing. And obviously, COVID is condensing time. You talked about human ritualistics. You can throw those out the window because of the changes we had to make. And then the post-COVID generation, the first set of digital citizens in the world, which is pretty amazing. And it just makes you wonder in the next few years, the next 10 years, what kinds of new technology and new things that we're going to have out there because of our COVID response and the things that are happening here. And Keith, I took a whole list of things down from you, but data being more relevant, being used in new ways, vaccines and unprecedented cooperation around the world, digital strategies that are accelerating, successful leaders showing empathy, which I think is just everything, and having to change the way that they're working and how their employees working, and building the next businesses, agile thinking, and we got a lot from you, so thank you very much, Keith. And Dr. Zaid, bidirectional process and machine learning digitally, globally, and it's just amazing what is transforming there. Like you were talking and Tim was talking about his daughter, you know, something that works for one person could work for others around the globe. And through telemedicine and through digitalization and learning, there's going to be huge transformation there. And I know so many people that have gone down that same path as your daughter and you did, Tim, that found a new solution and got off of something that is the common practice of medicine, and it's great that we actually have learning and new ways of doing things. And then
and doctors that'll take that step out there and get out of the common way of thinking. So thank you for doing that, Zaid. It's amazing to get people who are thought leaders, and with all of this thought leadership, I feel really fortunate and blessed that I can be connected to people like this around the world. I hope with the World From Here series that we're doing, we're helping other people connect. If you got anybody that you'd like us to bring into the next webinar, let us know. Keith, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. Joel, you too. Just super to have you guys here. And we're gonna do a big thing with our master thought leadership down the road. So stay tuned for that. We have next week where we actually take all these questions and answer in just a 30-minute podcast. We'll invite these gentlemen back if they can make it for answering some questions we didn't get to. And thank you for joining us on your Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody. And stay safe, stay healthy, stay digital.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And again,
Thank you, everybody.
You can follow us on Twitter at BlockSearchBuzz, at Tim S. Vasco, or Telegram, blocksearch.com. And send any questions that you have to info@blocksearch.com. And last week we had about 40 questions, and a lot of them were very similar, but we'll get to your questions next week at the Q&A session. So thanks again for joining us. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.